The purpose of this video is to give you guys an understanding of where you should be positioned at the Rayquaza in your particular roles. Now I'm going to categorize this in 5 different ways. You've got the top lane carry, the jungler, the supporter, the defender, and the bottom lane mage. Now there are obviously different types of plays with those positions and I guess types of roles that you can undertake, but to keep it nice and simplified, I'm going to just keep it at those 5 roles. We're going to start off with our top lane role, right? So let's consider we're playing the Buzzsaw here. Now, the positioning generally you want to take is you're nice and early. You're at like 2 minutes 20, right? 2 minutes 20, you want to be getting into position. And the reason is because typically the enemy team is not in position at this 2 minutes 20. And it normally will maybe look something like this, right? Maybe it'll look something like this. You know, where their team might still be farming. Let's say your team is perfectly in position, right? Assumption number 1, they're just like, they're onto it. They've hit their power spikes. They got Unite moves. They are ready to get into the Rayquaza. Now, generally you want to be positioned up at this top area here. And the reason for this is because you're going to be providing your team with heaps of vision. Okay, so they can make an informed decision about what's going on at Ray. They know if the enemy team is coming through here, if they're trying to go for a back sweep through this way, right, even along here. So it keeps, unless if they make a and think of the pathing that someone like the Leafeon has to make. They've got to run all the way around here and all the way through there to get into a position not seen just because you're sitting right there. Or even if you sat right there, you'd completely block that, but then this kind of area would be, you know, without vision, right? So generally this bush here or this bush here is a great positioning, and it's for 2 reasons, right? One, it provides you easy access to be able to float around here and engage from the back or the side of a fight. So, and you don't want to be hitting the enemy head on, right, in this particular role. The second thing it does is it provides your teammate, your jungler and your mage role, very valuable information about where that particular Pokemon is. Like a Leafeon can just one-shot Pikachu, one-shot Venusaur. So you're providing them the vision to get their positioning correct. So that's very, very valuable, right? If you're the top laner, this is your main purpose, right? This is very, very good stuff that you can be doing for your team. All right, the second role we're going to consider is this tank role here. Now, the tank role is very, very, I guess it's easier in a coordinated 5-stack, but generally you want to be keeping a nice little distance from you and your mage, right? You don't want to go too far ahead because then they can't get that follow-up damage in. And you also don't want to, I guess, be too, you know, be sitting in this bush right next to them, because if the enemy decide to engage on you, then, well, you're going to get them killed, right? So you've got to have like a nice little distance here where your supporter can maybe throw an egg at you or give you a little bit of healing, and you can provide your team with quality vision, right? So generally I like this open space here because it provides your healer easy access to just jump in and out. It provides you a lot of mobility to move in and around. Because if you get caught up in this choke point, there's a lot of CC and stun that can happen. If you're in this big open space here, you can move up, like you can move in a 360 angle. Whereas if you're caught up in this choke right up in here, you can't, it's like you got up and you got down, right? Or if you got foul play, you can dive over there, right? So that's just something to be mindful of with this positioning. I would be floating around in here and getting some valuable, you know, information, right? And then if you see their tank in here, and you know, this is when you can make those communications, right? If you get poked by a what do you call a solar beam, as the tank, you can go, yeah, Muse in the bottom L, right? Muse in bottom right L. He you know, poked by solar beam, and then and so you're relaying that information onto your team. That way the Pikachu knows, oh, I'm not going to get, you know, he's just used solar beam. Okay, so okay, as well as that, if you've got this kind of positioning here, it also kind of doesn't like the enemy have to hard engage your team, right? If they want to break through this fortress that you're creating, they have to engage on you, right? They have to have a lot of follow-up here, right? A lot of follow-up to be able to engage, right? And then the top laner might, you know, might sweep from underneath here, or he might sweep from through behind there, right? So you are providing a team with very, very valuable information. So your main role as the tank is sit in open spaces, provide vision, and give those callouts for your team, right? It's very, very useful. Now we're going to consider playing this jungle role. Now, obviously this is Pokemon dependent, right? With Venusaur, you can sit at the top side and you can hit the Rayquaza, but you can also Solar Beam into these bushes, right? You can poke through this. This is absolutely Pokemon dependent. I'm going to keep it nice and simplified. I'm going to say you should probably be sitting around here, just because the only way the enemy can get to you, if your tank's here, this is how the enemy needs to get to you. They have to, by brute force, break through, right? That's number one. And you're going to see that coming. Number two is they've got to sweep around like this. But generally, if you've got someone in this bottom L, you can see that coming. The third way they get to you is around like this. Now, if your support's sitting in that kind of spot here, you're going to see that coming as well. The other way is if they go all the way around from top side, like that. Okay, that's their other way. Now, that's the scariest one. This is where the Dodrios come in, right? They can unite, move, and bang, get straight into your backline, right? The other thing is if they're positioned in this bush here, or in this bush here, or in that bush there, that can be very, very scary for you. So that's why you need to be very careful of those bushes. When you're playing the jungler, you want to make sure that you know where the enemy dive Pokemon is, so they are not going to pick you off. But generally, you want to be sitting behind, and you want to make sure that you're nice and snug to your support, right? You want to be nice and snug, right? Small bit of distance, and then a bit extra distance to your tank, right? And you also want to be relatively close to your mage player, because they're the other Pokemon that are going to be doing a lot of damage from a distance in that fight. So you want to make sure that you're pretty close to the majority of your team, because one, they're providing vision for you, so you don't want to be having to look for the vision for yourself, especially when the enemy can dive on you. And secondly, it's your role to follow up with the vision they're providing. If you're picking this jungle role and your team is providing you vision, you should be doing damage, right? You should be following up. You should be poking the enemy back. You should be making sure that they're not pushing through here and making your Umbreon back out because he's getting chunked and they're not getting touched, right? So this is super, super important. So that is that jungle role. Now, the next role that I want to consider is playing this supporter role here. Now, this can be super, honestly, this is a genuinely super, super tricky, right? Because you're the first one to get blamed when something goes wrong. It's like, well, I was unsupported. And secondly, you've got to make sure that everybody feels and gets the support that they need, right? If you notice that your top laner is going for a sweep in and these guys are all good here, right? They're all good. They've got the enemy pushback. You kind of need to be able to float around and get that Blissey Unite through to him, right? Or you need to be able to throw some eggs on him, So you've got 4 other Pokemon on your team that you need to be looking out for. Generally 3, because the Mage doesn't necessarily get a lot of support from the supporter in these Ray fights. But your number one priority is making sure that your jungler is supported. You got to make sure that nobody can dive on him. You've got to have the stuns, you got to have the heals, and you got to have your Unite move ready to protect your jungler, because typically he's the highest level Pokemon and is the Pokemon that's doing the most value for you and your team. So number one priority is staying near your jungler. You've also got to be able to provide some heals onto your tank, because if he is providing you vision, we'll back out a little bit here. If he's providing you vision and he's getting poked, right, Solar Beam comes out. We'll just throw a little bit of healing on him, right? And he's back to full, so he doesn't have to base, right? This is the value of having a healer, having a support healer, right? And you've got to be in the proximity between your tank and your support. And also, most importantly, making sure that they don't sweep through here and pick off the Pokemon that's sweeping around that side. That's super, super important. Because if the Leafeon, if you were positioned here, right? If you were positioned here, the Leafeon can sweep around and go bang, right? And the first person to get vision on that Leafeon is the Venusaur, and that's not really what you want as a Venusaur. You want to make sure that you can eject away, because the Blissey has given you the vision that you needed, so you don't get dived on, right? So there's actually quite a lot of there's quite a lot of stuff to look out for when you're playing the support role. And again, this is the most thankless role, because you're not going to be the superstar with 120k dealt, especially if you're using a Pokemon with the low heals. So it's a fairly thankless role, but it's very, very pivotal pivotal to have a successful Rayquaza fight. So generally, if you're playing a solo and duo queue, a lot of time it is supporter and defender diff if these roles are played correctly with the correct follow-up. Now, the last role I want to have a look at is this Mage role here. And this is a fairly tricky role to get right because generally you've got the least amount of vision, unless if your top laner is positioned around here. You've got to be careful to get dived on here. And this role generally is the role that you want to be defending these goal zones. So I'm going to zoom out here. If this goal zone is still active, it's your role as the Pikachu to be able to cast the skill on there and defend the goal zone. It's also the role that you need to be like, or even if it's like top lane here, right? If this one's broken down here, if that's broken there, and this one is still active, then you should probably be positioned around there, right? So, you know, that's a couple of, I guess, initial considerations when you're using this Mage character. The next one is that you need to be providing the additional damage. So you've got to be fairly close to your tank. Typically, this is again not a one size fits all. Fairly close to your tank, and you want to be following up, and you never, ever over engage, because the worst mistake you can do as a Mage player, let's say the Umbreon engages, he gets, you know, CC'd a little bit by this Trevenant, he gets poked here, and then the Dragapult follows up and he's A pressing, and he's got to back out, but you've overstepped it, right? You're like super aggressive here. That means he's got to back out, and then what happens? Then they're going to attack you, right? So you're in a lot of trouble there. So and again, this is where some extra range and extra mobility of that Mage player comes in. This is why I'm a big fan of Espeon, because you've got that stored power mobility. This is why I like the Pokemon like Inteleon. You've got those skills that can get you in and out of these bad situations, right? That's why I'm a little bit hesitant with Pokemon like Chandelure, because it's quite dependent on, especially if you're in a solo queue game and your tank just backs out, you're sitting duck here and you're the first to go. And then it's a 5v4, right? And then the team can heavy engage here, right? They can heavy support, heavy follow up, right? There's a lot of damage here. And then this top laner can come and sweep from there or sweep behind, right? It puts your team at a very big disadvantage. So I guess to recap here, where you want to be positioned with that Mage, right, is, let's go to Pikachu. You want to be floating around here, and you need to make sure that you're keeping a distance between the tank, right? You don't have to be sitting there being pocketed by the support, right? But you've got to make sure that you're keeping a nice leash distance there from your tank. And if your tank backs all the way out here, then go back around here, right? Don't overcommit. Don't ever be the person to be in front. But you've also got to make sure, and this is super important, that you are continuing to put pressure on the enemy team. You need to continue to tap them and attack them, right? You can't just sit back here and go, oh, I'm on half health and base, right? And then just disappear. No, you need to be there. You need to cast your skills over the wall or into this area here or into this bush here. Because if there, for example, Mew tries to take this positioning here, you need to be able to poke him away, right? So it's super important. You can't completely back out of a fight, but you need to be keeping your kiting distance so that you are, again, keeping that distance from your defender, but also putting the pressure on the other team, right? So you can't just completely back out and go into this bush unless if it's like all hell breaks loose and there's been 2 or 3 KOs. If no one's died, if it's still that 5v5, you must be maintaining pressure. Guys, you cannot pick these high damage roles and not do the damage. You need to be putting yourself in the position to be able to do the damage. So that's it, the Rayquaza guide. I really hope you guys get some value out of this. If you do, strongly appreciate it if you dropped a like on the video and click on one of these videos up in, I believe it's that top corner there, to get another guide and get a lot more value out of Pokemon Unite. Otherwise, jump on that solo queue, duo queue, and start winning some games.